part two starts in just a second, where we're going to be doing supporters' questions that were submitted via Facebook and Twitter. The first one we'll start with, not a supporter question, but from Rob Knox, was, do you need an interviewer for this? I'm free. Well, hopefully he's not that free because he's busy staying fit.
Well, last time I've been trying to FaceTime sort of every person within the squad once a week or so for the last few weeks, and every time I speak to Rob Knox, he hasn't got many clothes on. He's running around his house. He tells me he's busy, but I do think from the couple of examples we saw at the end of the season, Chris, that there are one or two things you could probably pick up from Bobby Knox with the interview skills that keep everyone gripped.
I think well, you could say I lost my marbles many years ago. So he's still got slightly fewer than I have rattling around.
I do think, though, you should definitely keep your clothes on if that's all right.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
A completely different athlete to Rob Knox.
Mate, when you get to 40, it all goes down from there. Just picking up the thing in terms of staying in contact with the squad, and there has been, there've been a few questions about the composition of the squad for next season. How difficult has it been to stay in touch with everybody? What's the reaction been? Has it been a transition from resignation in terms of or disappointment and resignation at the end of the season into positivity looking forward? What's the general feeling amongst the squad and the lads?
Well, I think it's similar to my own process, really. I mean, forgetting whether you're a coach or a player or whatever member of staff, that is understanding that this has impacted people more than just what their job title is, and where we were at the beginning was that uncertainty, and there's still uncertainty now, but right at the beginning we weren't really sure what it was. You initially sort of making the jokes about it at the club and not shaking hands and all those sort of things, to having that quick realisation that actually our season stopped and we don't have a job to do day to day, and that's the difficult part. And the players are, the more I speak to them, they're so dependent on a schedule and so used to getting up and being at the club for 7 o'clock. There's the team meeting at 8 o'clock and going through, and then they could fill their afternoons, but suddenly they're at home, they can't go out, and really trying to make sure the player is viewed as a person first, and what that person needs, and can we help at all, and can we create a little bit of structure, and if that's talking to me or some of the other coaches and sort of Chris and Dermot and so on, then and that's what they need, then great. The players, I think, over the last 6 or 7 weeks have gone through a bit of a roller coaster, because there's been so much uncertainty about when do we start rugby again, what the financial implication is on the club and the league, and so many different sort of variables. It's hard, and the mental health of the players probably being the most important thing for us. I've been as much as I can trying to give them as much information that I know, and to keep them informed and be transparent with what we're doing, and even if they're difficult questions or difficult conversations at times, being upfront and saying this is it, this is the situation, this is where we're at. We can't play rugby for a few months, or different parts that impact them personally. And there's, understandably, there's been a few changes we've had to make, and we're going to now have to adapt to that and put ourselves back together so we are ready to go and raring to go when we're allowed to be.
So what's the squad composition going to be next season? Just to answer that, general question. Sorry.
So we've been lucky that the last 4 years we've built the squad around having a first team setup of significant depth that's supported with, a part of that depth is the academy process, and what Ross has come in and built on the work that Phil Bolton's done is built that programme up from where Hal's community department leads into our under 16s, under 18s, and into development academy, and we're lucky we did that really in many ways, because we're going to have to call on and have the development academy players. Some of them will step up and become senior players, and they were going to do that anyway. But some of them will need to be sort of chucked in the deep end a little bit more than we probably thought to, and that's mainly because the senior squad depth that we've had, the leavers and the guys that are moving on, we haven't been able to replace them, and part of that's just down to blunt finances, and so our senior squad's a lot smaller, and it's probably closer to some of the other clubs in the championship now, and that means we need to be sharper with keeping them on the pitch, and making sure that all the investment we've made in our S&C and our medical provision with the wonderful people you referred to earlier on that come in and really underpin our programme, and we're using their expertise to keep these boys on the pitch. But when the time comes, making sure that we've nurtured these academy players as best we can, and when we chuck them in the deep end, they've got a sort of a dinghy and a life raft ready to go, and they're sheltered and so on. So the overall composition of the squad is it will look similar. We've still got senior players, we've still got academy players in there. We've just probably got less senior players and a few more academy players, and we may call on some dual registered players if there's gaps with injuries, and build relationships more with Premiership clubs, the 3 or 4 that are around us, to make sure that we've got opportunities for them to develop and chuck their lads in. But that helps us add more quality to the squad as well at times. So I hope that answers your question as best I can.
I think it's just a difficult time at the minute, and there are questions about finances that we'll come on to. But actually, no, we'll come on to it at the minute now, if you don't mind, which is both in terms of will the reduced financial support from the RFU hurt the club, and also from Derek Cook, after hearing London Scottish are turning semi-pro, how many other championship sides will go the same way with the RFU cutting funding? First thing on that is that Cov are still coming at it from a professional perspective, in terms of training during the day, training in multiple days a week, as opposed to the quote unquote part time of training in the evenings, which I know certainly a few clubs have already announced.
Yeah, so I can only really speak about our area really, and there's lots of rumours about what other clubs are doing, and I spoke to 3 or 4 other DORs, but from our point of view, we will still be a professional rugby club. We'll be still training in the daytime, and the boys they'll be there nice and early in the morning, and they'll leave just around sort of lunchtime, and we'll adapt our schedule a little bit so that we do finish at lunch rather than sort of mid-afternoon initially, and that's so that we really underpin or underline the opportunity for players to learn and earn additionally on top of what we do at the club. So if they're going to go off to university, or if they're going to take on other courses and really add to their post-rugby CV and that transition into the big bad world of real life, or whether they need to get some work experience or other income opportunities to supplement what they're doing from a rugby point of view. So I wouldn't say we're 100% full-time. We're kind of 80-90%, and we've had to take that a little bit of a hit on what we've built up to over the last 3 or 4 years, but hopefully that's only short term, and hopefully we can rebuild and scale that program back up over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. But in terms of what we want to deliver during the day and how we can prepare the boys, we've still got everything we need in terms of the hours in the week and the days we're training and so on. The rest of the league is pretty unknown. Everybody's adapted their program, that's for sure, in one way or another. Even the certain areas of London that don't seem to be hit by coronavirus as much as anyone else. But I'm sure they'll all adapt, and that's part of the game now. The competition necessarily isn't necessarily the league table next season. It's who can make the best of this situation, who can scale their program back up as quickly as they can, and that's an exciting challenge, especially from my point of view. It's a whole new different competition game. But there will be London Scottish, there'll be Nottingham, there already was Ampthill, Hartbury obviously train first thing in the morning and go off to other jobs or through students and stuff at the college. There's a number of people that have had to change. So I think there'll be 5 or 6 clubs in the league that will be operating out of evening training or first thing in the morning and then going off and having a job. There'll still be 3 or 4 clubs that are a bit like us that are somewhere in between, and then there'll be 1 or 2 Sarries and Ealing probably that are still full on full time.
Just in terms of preparation, this is from Tim Smith. As I understand it, there won't be a head coach as such next season following Nick Walsh's departure. If so, who is the quote senior coach unquote? Should there be situations where there isn't a consensus as DFR, will that fall to you now, or will you become more involved in coaching decisions?
But bluntly, I've always had final say and final approval on team selection, on everything that goes on at the club across all departments in the rugby side. So that hasn't changed in my 4 years or so that I've been at the club. What we've had is I try and surround myself with people that are young and hungry and keen to develop and learn and make sure that they are experts in their own field. So whether that's Anthony Allen with his attack or James Scaife with his defence, or across to Chris Hart or Lewis Deacon or Ross Stewart or Dermot, these guys lead their areas. And when it comes to selection, when it comes to making those decisions, we take the sort of qualified experience from those guys and they put their opinion in and their key influences in everything we do. And then I'll make that final decision. Along the way, we don't tend to disagree on much at all because we're all sharing the same sort of common goal. We're working together closely. We're developing those relationships. So thankfully, we don't have full-blown arguments over anything like that. There's some good, healthy discussions at times, but we tend to come to the same consensus.
From Jamie, how are we going to make the step from top four championship side to competing for promotion? Because there's always that big gap to bridge with the relegated side.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question, Jamie. It's one that I lose sleep and get a haircut more like yours over day by day. But it's tough. We've gone from before I came to the club, sort of mid-table champ that year, before National 1 to 4th to 1st to 8th to 4th, and there needs to be an understanding that the next challenge is actually, this probably takes us back a year. Coronavirus and the RFU Cups combination takes us back a year at least. So I'm seeing it at the moment that to finish 4th next season would be a fantastic achievement on the less resources and a smaller squad than we've had to just finish 4th a month or so ago. So I'm not too concerned at the moment about how we come to 2nd or 3rd. That may happen next season because we've got the quality in the staff and the squad that we've got. But actually it's about rebuilding the programme and adding value back to that programme and making sure we learn from the lessons that we've had from this reset and a bit of thinking time to how can we improve. And I'm not over worried because it's almost, we've got the lessons we learned from last season. Although we're back, this puts us back a year, we've still got the lessons and the experiences as a group and as a group of players that we can hopefully not make those mistakes again over the next season. But our biggest challenge is actually rebuilding the programme now and rebuilding it back up to the level where we were a month or two ago. Hopefully that won't take us too long at all, and if that means that we're 4th next year or 3rd next year or 6th next year, that doesn't really bother me. It's about actually the quality of the programme, and I know I've said this a number of times before, but the club's going to continue to sort of rise up on and off the pitch. Where we are at a certain point in May 2021 is irrelevant as long as the direction we're heading is up and we're moving forward on all points, and May 2021 is just a checkpoint. There's multiple checkpoints along the way that we'll use to reassess what we're doing.
Yeah, and ultimately, as Ealing have shown in terms of the last few years, is that bridging that gap against the Premiership, the 13th Premiership team, is very, very hard.
Yeah, apart from probably Ealing's budget, majority of the Championship clubs are operating between 500 grand a year and 2 million quid a year. Ealing probably a little bit more than that. The Premiership clubs are coming down from somewhere between an 8 and a 12 million pound spend on their rugby sort of programme alone and adapting that for life in the Championship. But even if you cut Saracen's budget in half, it's still 4, 5, 6 times what we're having. So understanding bridging that gap is actually not our target at the moment. It's not our priority. Our priority is more what I was waffling on about, is actually us rebuilding our own programme, concentrating on our own jobs, and our point is getting back to standing on our own 2 feet and growing the club across the board. And that's from a commercial point of view, a communications point of view, everywhere where we're trying to become Premiership ready. That target doesn't change. Saracens give us a great example in the league of what that would take and what we can learn from them along the way, just like Newcastle and London Irish before them. We will get closer gradually, and we will get closer to them, and hopefully at some point in the not too distant future we're in a position where we can go toe to toe pretty comfortably.
From Pro 15 Rugby, what's the single biggest challenge the players are facing right now?
I think the single biggest challenge is probably more as people, as I touched on earlier on, not necessarily as players. They've had to. This process will make them more resilient. It will make them more patient. They'll have to adapt. Their problem solving, their financial management, balancing what they're doing. They've had more thinking time. They haven't had a schedule to determine every second of what they do throughout the day. So I think it's probably developed a lot of skills and probably forced them to develop a lot of skills that hopefully we can harness when they come back into the club, and we can learn from those experiences and try and put them onto the pitch and help what we're doing, help what we're growing. So they've probably grown as people. The biggest challenge is definitely not being a rugby player at the moment. The biggest challenge is managing their home life and their mind and the uncertainties and the anxiousness and so on, all that sort of bits. And if they come through all of that well, then they'll be in a far better position when we say pass and catch this ball.
Just to clarify, though, in terms of while they don't have a set schedule in terms of team meeting at 7:30, gym at 8 or whatever, is that they do have a training framework from Chris and Dermot in terms of looking after themselves.
Before we kind of in the days building up to we played Doncaster. If you remember, we scaled back the squad anyway, so we tried to adapt to the situation before we sort of broke, I suppose, for coronavirus, and we removed anybody in the squad that wasn't going to have a direct impact or part to play in that Doncaster game, and we did the same with the staff. So we only had those on site that were necessary, and that meant that we gave everybody, players and staff, a work programme and a schedule to go with for when they weren't at the club. So all we've done is just add a bit of detail to that, and before we kind of sent them away, we said this is what we need to do, and that kind of takes them right up to the point when we come back to the club. So the boys are clever lads, you know. They've learned a lot over the years, and Chris has added a lot of detail into what they do in their time at the club. So they know what to do. They know what they need to be lifting. They know, and that's not just for being a rugby player. That's just for them keeping themselves healthy and active as a human being. So they're more probably resourced than most. So we think they'll be in a good spot when they come back, and they've had a good amount of information to sort of deal with.
I think that's answered Mark Harrison's question about did the lead up to the Doncaster game give you valuable experience moving forward of what's practical and how to put protocols in place. So I think you've answered that one with that. From Phil Reynolds, looking back, which game from this season gave you the biggest disappointment and why?
Ampthill away. When you lose games, classic cliche here, sorry for it in advance, but if you lose games to a team that are let me get rid of that. I've got someone ringing me. There you go. That wasn't me dodging the question, trust me. From the reason why it was Ampthill is they outworked us. They wanted the win more than us, and I actually think that on those two occasions before Christmas that we played them, one home and one away, we tore them apart, and we controlled the tempo and imposed our game on them. We went away in January and took things for granted. And the reason why it disappointed me more is part of me saw it coming, and the other half of me was just hoping that we'd learnt some of those lessons along the way. And over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been these occasional blips, and there will be. You can't win every single game. You don't perform every single week. But it was not necessarily about who we were playing. It was more about the way we lost the game was the more disappointing part.